it's more of a pivotal point in one's life when you turn 40. And for me, I think I want to be. I'm basically trying to figure out who I want to be in my second half of life, basically.
When will you turn 40?
Oh, I'll be 40 in December 18.
December 18. I like the smile you gave us before you talked about the birthday being on December 18. I wish you happy birthday in advance.
Thank you so much.
When life begins at 40, that's what they say. All right. So there's a lot on your chest you want to talk about, right? What's the focus?
No, like I said, basically the same thing I think about every day. Family, the country, you know, you know, what tomorrow will bring. I think it's important that it's not just enough to think about these things, but to be deliberate with your thoughts. So see what can I do today to shape my tomorrow. So basically, for me, I think every time I do one of these interviews, it's not necessarily about today, but about what tomorrow could be.
All right. So you mentioned family. Your family is not new to Nigerians in any way. But at the same time, at some point, Nigerians stopped seeing and hearing your family. Yeah? So what has been going on with your family?
No, well, you have to understand that, you know, my father being the late Chief MKO Abiola and my mother being Alaja Kuduras Abiola, the whole June 12, 1993 elections was, came up as a root shock to the psyche of the family as a whole. You know, in one breath, we were excited and optimistic about the opportunity of my father becoming the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And, it seemed so surreal when we had the announcement of the annulment of the elections. Not necessarily surreal in the sense that, maybe my father was disappointed that he wasn't the president, but I could sense, I don't know the word. I think my father was basically, he was in a rush to fix things. So I felt the anguish in the fact that he wasn't given an opportunity to serve. I think that was most what really hurt my father the most was he wasn't really in it to be president. In all with all the bells and whistles, but I think he was in it to be president so he could make a difference. And I don't think it was even only a difference in Nigeria, but also a difference in Africa. And you would have known anybody who had heard any of his stories or knew him during his time. You know that he was a prolific philanthropist. He invested heavily in Nigerians and Africans alike. I remember, certain, for me, it's not about the loss of my family or my father or my mother, but I think it's about what they stood for and trying to move that needle forward. I believe that they had a vision for the country, and yeah, you can kill the messenger, but you can't kill the message.
Very important. Something you just said now. It's about moving forward. It's about moving forward with the legacy of your dad, moving forward with the legacy of your mom. But let's talk about your dad a bit. What has happened? You talked about you need to get the family okay and all of that as you're turning 40. Tell us about your father's will. What has happened to what he wanted his family to be like? What are the key elements in that succession planning and asset distribution that is missing, that has been implemented? What's going on? I'm sure Nigerians are curious about that.
Well, yeah, like with everything my father does, he's very meticulous in his outlook and approach to everything. He was an accountant by trade, as a matter of fact, an auditor. And if anybody knows anything about auditors, you know that they're the one group of accountants that people don't like, because what they do is they check other people's work. So they're like administrators, and most companies don't like administrators very much. but they're there for a reason. Administrators are there for a reason because they give, their role is supposed to guide the company in ethical ways of doing things. So my father, being an auditor and being an accountant, was very meticulous in everything he did. So at the time of his passing in 1998, you have to understand that he had been arrested in '94, and he was later on assassinated in '98. And once he was assassinated, my father had a will and last testimony, and it was very detailed, piece of document. It was a very detailed piece of document because what you see, if anybody were to look at the document is actually available online if anybody wanted to check what my father had put in his will. What you see is a man who was deliberate, who wanted to ensure that his wealth went to the right, was divided properly, well, according to his wishes. So on the will you see that he had specified the wives that would be and the exact amount of money that should be apportioned to each wife. He did that basically by due to number, like so the first wife got about 300,000. My mother was apportioned about 150,000. The third wife was about, I think, 100,000, and the fourth, just like that. And he went down like that. He was even to the point that after he had accounted for all the wives, I think there were about, I think in the world there were maybe 30 wives identified. He also accounted for
30 wives.
Yeah, it was. My father had. Yeah, I don't know if you know. He had a bunch. He had a lot of wives. Father, but then you have to understand that it was also not something that was frowned upon at the time. I think now in the 20th century, well, yeah, but like now in the time we're in is more something that is not necessarily promoted. But like at the time he was doing it, it wasn't something that was frowned upon. And so he had identified 30 wives, and he also even identified some of his siblings and also apportioned funds to them as well. So you can see that he was a family man through and through. He identified his family, his wives. He identified his siblings, and so some certain people also that he had included in his will that he had apportioned to. And I think the last excerpt or the last part of the will was basically when it now became an issue of the children. So my father was adamant about certain things. One, that anybody who was claiming to be an Abiola would have to go through a blood test, which most of us have done. And then once you'd gone through the blood test, there was a trust created, and the trust was supposed to manage the affairs of all his properties within the shores of Nigeria. So this will was basically cultured around Nigeria, within the shores of Nigeria. There were 3 trustees that were supposed to be appointed. It was between a lawyer, one of my father's lawyers, Mr. Hugh. I know that there was a second lawyer in the UK as well, and then the third party was supposed to be the NatWest Bank. I was very young at the time. When I spoke to my siblings about this, I spoke to my sister Hafsat Costello Abiola about this, and also my brother Leko and Jamu, and they said that NatWest Bank for some reason had pulled out of being one of the trustees, and once they had pulled out, it created a space, a vacuum. And it's so funny because at the time of my father's death in '98, my oldest brother for my mother, who was Alhaji Fulot Abiola, was no more than 20. He was about to be 21, and he was still in university. I think he was about to graduate. So he wasn't necessarily in the business framework. He wasn't part of the organization, so he didn't know where anything was. But like, if you know the first family, my brothers Kola, Agbo, Deji, and Wura, and the last one, they were already older. They had already graduated, and matter of fact, even in some ways working with Daddy through around that period, even before the elections. You know, they had been working with Daddy. I think my brother Kola is about 20 years older than me, so you have to understand the gap between age gap. So basically, I was about 8 years old when all this was happening, and so due to the vacuum that was created by NatWest Bank leaving, we had a situation where my brother, knowing those two lawyers of my father, I don't know, maybe there was some kind of, one hand rubbing the other going on, where my brother now petitioned the court to make him an administrator.
To make him Kola?
Yeah, an administrator. As part of the tripartite team, the two lawyers, instead of NatWest Bank, he was going to take over the space of NatWest Bank. Like I said, all these things were happening. We were not informed. I was, at the time, my mother had been killed in '96, so we had left. Most of my siblings were in America. We didn't go to the UK, so all this court cases that we're talking about was happening in the UK. We didn't know anything about this, and he had petitioned the court to become an administrator. With that situation, I find like there's a conflict of interest in that. I don't know how you can be a judge and jury in your own case.
But did NatWest give a reason for pulling out?
I've not been able to I've not been able to find exactly the cogent reason why they did pull out. It could have been anything. We can't. I can't say, but it will be something that I would like to find out, because it will be it's very instrumental to know that. Somebody's last living document is will and testament is something that is supposed to be sacred, and anybody that is entrusted with such a sacred document, pulling out, suggests, some. It doesn't bode well, especially for the execution of the will, especially as dictated in the document. So anyway, he was able to approach the courts in the UK to become an administrator, which they gave him in 2004. So so all this time, he was now basically an administrator. Like I said, we were not aware of this, but notwithstanding, the will and the document, like I said, is a living document. Is his last statement. Everything should be followed to the letter.
Yeah.
Because the owner of the property is telling you what to do with the property. Now, nobody should intervene with that process. It's not yours. You didn't pay for it. You didn't work for it. The person who did all the work is saying this is how he wants it to be divided, which is done in all over the world. So it's not new to the Abiola family. So what we're talking about is not reinventing the wheel. This is something that is natural. It's actually part of moving on. It's part of closure. When all the members of the family, all the beneficiaries of the family come together, and that document is read out in front of everybody, where everybody can, they just, it's, you take your little piece and you can make amends, or you make your peace with God, or you make you pray for your father and stuff like that. But so anyway, in 2008, this happened. He became an administrator. I'm sure people might remember that there was a publication in the papers that stated or listed the names of the Abiola children who passed the DNA test. I think we were totaling about 55 at the time. Yeah, so...
And did he communicate with the rest of you in 2004 that the court had granted him leave to become administrator?
No, I would say that Bakola had been, he's been managing the estate basically like it's personal property, as far as I'm concerned. So nobody was consulted, nothing, And my father, like I said, was meticulous in anything he did. There was none of my father's companies that he put any of his children as directors. None. If you look at any of his companies, and he listed it famously in one of his interviews where he named all the companies, Summitor, Ondalo, you will see that in all these companies you find that Abiola is 99.99999%, and then there's one person that is 0.00001. But what you find is, I think at the time you needed two directors to form a company, so he was only doing it because it was the law. If it wasn't part of the law, he would have just been the sole.
So like,
yeah, so because if I'm taking 99.99999%, I don't know what that 0.0001% is going to do for you. So because you basically don't have any rights. So, and he could have either just done 51% if he felt like they were partners. So yeah, so notwithstanding, so like I said, it's a living document, the will, and it states clearly what should be done with his wealth, and he named the wives the amounts that should be given, and basically the last caveat was after the blood test, all descendants and all beneficiaries of his will should now everything should be shared equally amongst all of us. That was his. That was basically what he basically did for the children. So he had given the wives and his brothers and siblings, and he said everything else should be collated, either sold or because it's a trust, they can invest, they can, release it out. Funds are coming in, they just share that money, so he doesn't necessarily have to sell. And I don't think my father would have bought all the assets he did in Nigeria just so that his children would just come right after he passes and sells them. So I think he wanted us to move the needle forward and expand on these things, employ more Nigerians. So I think some of my my issue with this total situation is that even our father's ambition, which was to make sure that Nigerian people had, something to do, and he created businesses not necessarily for profit, but because he understood that, you need to, to whom much is given, much is expected, and he saw himself as a custodian for the Nigerians' work because he did make a lot of his money from Nigeria, so he was giving back in a way that he was employing Nigerian people, giving them, he had a famous saying, "Don't cheat, don't give somebody fish, but teach them how to fish." So it wasn't something that he thought that, okay, let me just give somebody a handout. He said, "Oh no, you can work in my company and you get this," and then it gives you some sense of ownership of something. You're part of a bigger movement. And I think the Abiola family was not only the Abiola children. It was also the extended family, which were those people that worked with him, those people that were able to just meet him. I know people that I meet on a daily basis where they tell me now that when they met my father, years before I was even born, that he did something so that was so touching to them, and they wanted to thank me. And so for me, when I hear these things, it's an encouragement for me to want to help other people. But you can only help other people when you can help yourself.
When you can help yourself. So talking about helping yourself, what happened to all those resources, all the companies? Who is controlling them now? Is it the caller controlling everything, Summit, the bookshop, and all these businesses? Can you give us an insight into how it's being run now?
Okay, like I told you, I was very young during that time, but they were already involved in most of my father's businesses before his incarceration and then later on his assassination. So you can see that I will say that they used that advantage to basically run all these companies to the ground. And I don't know, maybe the strategy could have been, if there's nothing to see, then they will not ask for anything. So but I think that's a defeatist mindset, and it's like, okay, you got to budget. You don't have to be. I'm very quick to turn the other page. I'm not looking to create Concord newspaper again, but the property can be used to generate funds in another way. If we are turned into a bonded warehouse, you could generate funds that way. So that you can't always just be trapped in an illusion that there's nothing that you can do. As long as you're breathing, you should always know that there's always a move or a step that you can take that would lead us forward. So like I said, we were young, they took advantage of their position, and I think that advantage that they took was where being that they were known, because of their closeness to daddy, and they were adults at the time, they were known across board, so they were able to leverage that knowledge, the fact that they were known. And like I said, we were not even in the country. I didn't come back to Nigeria until 2007. He had gotten that thing in 2004. There are so many things that had happened that I can't even tell you about. The properties that my father had that we don't even remember, we can't even locate them anymore. So the issue with my brother, I think in his effort to try to instead of execute the will as a true trustee and an administrator would, he basically became a clog in the process and frustrated every effort to execute the will. Like I said, so we just have a situation where the will is clear, what should be done is clear, but there are certain forces who are just who are hell-bent in just making sure that nothing ever happens, or it just stays in some kind of, the situation is in limbo. It shouldn't be this way. Like I said, it's his last will and testament, and if that document is followed, that if it is followed to the letter, we won't be having this conversation.
All right. So you're saying that currently now, you don't even know what's going on with all the companies of your father. You don't know who is controlling them, or you're saying your siblings, because you're the youngest, not the youngest, because you are young, you don't have access to the running of these organizations.
Okay. So basically, this is basically what I'm saying in a nutshell. I've already made it clear that my father did not make any of his student directors of his companies. Now, the only way, once the two directors or the directors are not are deceased, the only way, what normally should happen is that the company should go into something called, I think, moribund, and then there should be a meeting of all the beneficiaries where we now appoint new directors. And that never happened. At least not to the best of my knowledge. It never happened. So what we found out later on, over doing my research, is that my brother had somehow become a director in most of my father's companies. Wow. Now I wonder how that happened. The documents to that effect has, in matter of fact, put some of his own siblings in as directors in other companies as well. Apparently, he's a director of Summit Oil, as well as his sister Wura Ola is a director, which should not be the case. DG is director of I think the Abiola bookshop, which should also not be the case. But it's funny that
what of Agbo?
Agbo is also a director. I think it's RCN that they made him a director of. Work up quickly and it shouldn't be the way. It's not that. That's not what my father had put in the will. And I guess they had assumed that maybe, like we would maybe not be alive after such a long time, because like after we're talking 98 when his man died, and this conversation has been had in 2024. We're almost about to get to 30 years of his death, and we're still having a conversation about a will that was written in maybe even the 90s.
Yeah.
So, the will might even be older. Well, maybe not older than me, but the will is older than my son. So the issue for me is, because like I said, these are my siblings. So I have to be very careful in the choice of words. But I think if anybody were to look at my situation, you will find that what has been done maybe actually, and what is being done is maybe criminal.
That's deep. That's a lot. Have you tried to seek redress? Have you tried to go back to court to talk about some of these things?
My brother, as we are all in the same country, Nigeria is both the best country and can also be the worst country. I'll tell you a story about this issue of courts. I was at my house in Ikeja, 20th Street, with by myself actually. I like being in, like, having my silent moments. By myself, thinking about my next move, and some group of people came knocking on the door, and then I'm like, how are you? What can we do for you? And they said that they would like to see the Abiola children, and I happened to be in the house, so they came to call me. When I approached the gate and I met with them, they had told me that they were from a community called Ayobo in the Alimosho local government. I had never heard of this community before. I said, okay, what can I do for you? They had now proceeded to tell me that my father, at one point, had bought 400 hectares of land in that Ayobo. And that my father had this, because apparently at the time, when I asked my brother, he told me that at the time, my father was complaining that the Murtala Mohammed International Airport was charging him too much to park his jets. So my father had procured the land so that he could create his own airstrip and park his jets where nobody can be charging him outrageous sums. But before he was able to actualize his dream to create the airstrip, people had started encroaching on the land. Apparently, my father became aware of this encroachment and approached the court to seek redress. Apparently, my father also, once he did approach the court did give him judgment, the judgment basically specified that yes, he's the one that owns it and that he can take over. So there's something, it's called the Form M and Form O. So it's to take over possession and then demolish anything you find on your land, as long as it's not what you intended to do with it in the first place. And my father got that judgment, but he never executed the judgment because I think it was around the time of the elections. He didn't want to. But my father also had met with the community who had been encroaching and had told them that he was going to make available space for them to have their community. So he's not going to just push them off. Yeah. They will just make a place available because he doesn't need the whole 400 for the strip and everything else he wanted to do. So no problem. But my father didn't, like I said, didn't execute the will of the judgment. So these people came to me because apparently my brother had been, through a third party, had been selling the land, and just so it was through a back end. So somebody would sell the land, take the money to my brother, and he was just happy collecting crumbs. So when I found out about this, they told me. So all I had to basically do, I wasn't reinventing the will again. This is my father's judgment. I'm just getting that judgment revalidated, which I did. So I approached the courts to get the judgment revalidated, which the courts were glad to give him. Upon this, I basically got the same thing my father got, the Form M and Form O. So me, the bailiffs from the court, and everybody, we headed to Alimosho. The first time I ever went to Ayobo. When I got there and we saw where the land was, and we started marking houses that were built on the land illegally, we must have gone over maybe 2,000 houses. At the time, I think my brother had heard from those that they had sold the land to, that he had collected money from. They had gone to meet him to seek redress, obviously, because the way I was going with it was, what you had done was bad, because you can't buy land without our permission, because we didn't know anything about it, and it's our land. We've come to take our thing back. So either you come and renegotiate or something, but the bottom line is our line in cover. So they go meet him, and then he takes me to court. So he took me to court for fighting for what belongs to all of us. So let's
be clear. Who took you to court?
The caller my brother took me to court because apparently, so he smacks me as, what is going on here? It just doesn't make any sense. Daddy himself got that judgment. Now those people, they came to meet me because after even the land my father had promised to give them, my brother is now trying to sell that too. So they came to meet me to seek redress for my brother. So those that my brother had sold the land to now came to me, my brother. He's taking me to court. I can tell you that I've been in court for the past 10 years.
On this matter?
On this Ayobo matter.
So you've been in court after getting judgment that your dad got revalidated. And you're trying to execute it. Your brother took it to court. Yeah. So what has happened to that land now?
It's basically, we're still in court, and like I said, if something's under land, you don't want to, be going against the law. You wait for the judges or the law to take its course.
That's quite interesting. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Abdul MKO Abiola on his thoughts into that pattern. All right, so there's somebody we've been hearing about. His name is KD7. Who is KD7? Okay,
KD7 is actually is like an acronym, and it just means it's just Kudirat 7. So it's there's 7 children from my mother, Halaja Kudirat. Alaji Leko Abiola, Haja Hafsat Abiola, Alaji Jami Abiola, Kafila Abiola, Miriam Abiola. I and my younger brother Hadi Abiola. That's the Kudi7.
Okay, so for the past few years, KD7 has been silent on everything that's going on around the Abiola family. Why are they just coming out now?
It's not that we're just coming out now. Sometimes, especially in the Yoruba culture, you find that you don't, and even not even beyond. Well, the Yoruba culture is very important to me, but my father's legacy is also just as important. And I think we need to be very careful in how we manage this situation, because not to act like I'm proud, but I really respect the man, and I don't want anything to tarnish his image or bring him to some kind of ridicule. So what we did was we were very patient. We tried to use channels that were not maybe not publicly known, but we reached out to certain people in close family friends, people who we knew were close to the late Chief MKO Abiola to intervene. And some have tried, a lot have tried. I don't know if it might be in a good stead for me to announce some names, but I think there have been a lot of great people who have tried to intervene. And you know, well, as you can see, we're still in the same situation. So I guess nothing really came out of the interventions.
Yeah. So you're sitting here alone now, talking about this. Are your siblings, are they also interested in this? Um, are they joining you in the calling out of Paula and Wura? What's going on between you and them? What's the dynamics?
Okay, so like I said, the Kudi Seven were all we stand together, and we're just saying the Kudi Seven, but it's not only the Kudi Seven. Like I said, the whole family are in unison when it comes to the conversation around the late Chief MK Abiola's last will and testament. The only dissenting voices is from the first family, and it's very sad. They had been lifting. They had lifted over 600,000 barrels of oil, and I didn't collect one naira. Now, uh, my own is even simple. That it's not even that I didn't collect one naira. How were you lifting 600 barrels of oil? Is there any records on this? How much monies have been transferred between you and that Dupont Limited that you haven't disclosed? So this one that you didn't get is the one that you're going to take it. But how much has he? Has this company generated and transferred? This now becomes, this is even more of a case for the IG. And I think I've written a letter to the IG on this matter. I wrote a letter to him telling him to actually get to the bottom of this matter, if not for my sake, but for the memory of the late Chief MK Abiola. Things need to be done properly. You can't tell me that Summit Oil was lifting apparently since 2017, and I'm hearing about it in 2024, and then I just don't understand how this works. How do you live from 2017 to 2024 without any public record? Shouldn't it be a OML? Shouldn't there be royalties being paid to the federal government? Yeah, I'm losing, but the nation too is also losing. So it smacks me of either a situation where the management doesn't understand the implications of what they are writing as a petition. Because if you are stating for verbatim that you have 600,000 barrels and you've been able to lift 600,000, that means how many barrels are in there?
Did you write to the presidency, NNPC, and every other organization involved, or you've written only to the IG?
Okay, so we've written to the IG to investigate the allegations of funds transfers between just investigate the whole summit oil, because I think there's some shady things going on there. That's number one. We've also written to DPR. We've written to the partner companies like Ali Burton, and I think there's a partner company that we've written to, just to get them to cease and desist anything done on that oil block. Enough is enough. And if you read the will, my father actually even stipulated that the churches should hold all these things in trust. So the oil block will have been a producing asset, and all the funds will be put into a seed. He said that when you're now 21, just like it's done all across the world, so you're not giving a child a lot of money. When you are 21 and you've graduated, you are now allowed to get. So what I'm saying to you is that if this money is actually available, how many of Abiola's children are actually going around looking for seed money to start a business and cannot do it? But this is available. It is sad. For me, I think when we put things into perspective, I think I might have to also read the president into this. He needs to be aware, as the chief security officer of the country and somebody who was a strong supporter of the late Chief MK Abiola. I think he should also be keen to solve this issue once and for all during his own tenure. This will be something that we can say, yes, Asiwaju Kiniyi. Enough is enough. It's almost going to be 30 years, like I said, since he died. Let it not be 30 years and we're still having this conversation.